Ready?
Yes. Right. Thumbs up.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Edberg. I'm the council member representing Ward 4, but I'm also the chair of the White Bear Lake City Council, which under our city charter means that I have the responsibilities of the mayor when the mayor is out of the city or otherwise incapacitated. For those who remember our history will know that the first Thanksgiving was celebrated in November 1621. This marks the 400th anniversary of the first Thanksgiving. Mayor Emerson's forebearers participated in that event. They were not on the Mayflower. They came on one of the later ships, but were there, and she is on Cape Cod this week, celebrating that 400th anniversary of her family participation in the first Thanksgiving. I hope, Mayor, that you are not watching this evening, that you have something better to do with your time. But I do want to express one of my Thanksgivings is the work that Mayor Emerson has done for 12 years as our mayor of our community. And she has been tireless and selfless in her service and worthy, in my mind, of lots of Thanksgiving. Member Jones is also on a trip out of the city this week, a long-planned trip. So both of those are excused absences. Noting all of that, I will call to order this meeting of the City Council of the City of White Bear Lake. I would ask the clerk to note all those in attendance.
Thank you. All will be noted.
Thank you. I would ask you to rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Council, you have before you the minutes of our last meeting. Are there any corrections or additions to be made?
Move approval. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. You have before you the proposed agenda for the evening. Ms. Heinecker, are there any changes that staff wish to make?
Mr. Chair, members of the council, no changes.
Are there any council members wishing to make changes to the agenda?
Move approval. Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We have no visitors and presentations this evening. We have no public hearings. We have one item of land use. It's on the consent agenda, and the item has been background on the resolution granting a one-year time extension for a preliminary plat at 1800 County Road E. What's the pleasure of the council?
Move approval. Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We have no unfinished businesses and no ordinances. We'll move to new business, item 9A, a resolution requesting the Met Council to pause planning activity on the Purple Line. Councilmember Walsh, this was your request to have this on the agenda, and so I will give you an opportunity to make a motion, and if seconded, we'll enter into conversation. I'll throw the ball to you first, but do you have a motion you wish to put in front of us?
Well, sure. If you want the motion first, we'll do. I'll move the resolution that's before you.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. It's open for discussion. Member Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Acting Mayor, whatever we're supposed to call you.
Mr. Edberg is fine.
Mr. Edberg, thank you. Well, let me start with a thank you too, because I've been saying for a long time on this topic, this Rush Line, which is now Purple Line, that we need to have a community conversation, a community-wide conversation about whether we want it or not. And we've had a lot of small votes and throughout the process. And I asked the mayor a while ago to plan and schedule this meeting. Originally, a municipal consent vote. Kind of changed my mind recently on I think a better option for today with this resolution in front of you. But originally asked for a municipal consent vote, and the mayor graciously said, let's do it on the 23rd. My colleagues agreed too, so she's not here, but I would thank her for putting this on the agenda. The mayor does control the agenda, so first a thanks. I will say that we've had a lot of small votes, and it bothers me. We got a letter this week from a group promoting the Purple Line now, and they said something, they repeat something that I've seen a lot, and I'll just read the line, but it's like, in 2020, cities of St. Paul, White Bear Lake, Vadnais Heights, Maplewood have approved resolutions of support for the preliminary plans for the project. I suppose that sentence is technically true. We have approved motions in this body. I've made jokes about picking out the wallpaper in the stations before we actually decide we want to do it. But we really haven't had a vote in White Bear Lake, yes or no. So I'm glad we're here. I'm glad we're finally taking that vote. I think what I've got in front of you is a reasonable resolution. Doing some research, found that the U of M, that the legislature in 2021, this summer, when they're doing their omnibus spending bills, tucked a provision into the transportation bill to commission a study from the University of Minnesota Center for Transportation Studies to study ridership in our system-wide post-COVID. And so I think they're looking at North Star. I mean, that was kind of the target of the resolution. If you look back at what they did in the legislature, they're really concerned about the North Star rail line, which has really dropped like 90% of ridership during COVID and hasn't bounced back. But the language of their resolution, the language asking for the study at the U of M, calls for kind of a system-wide metropolitan transit, trains, buses, all of their transit services. Look at the data, and the resolution reads they're going to look at where is it? They had a list of things they were going to look at. I lost it. Oh, here it is. Analysis and projections on anticipated changes in ridership, demand for different modes and forms of active and public transportation, transit service levels and features, revenue and expenditures, and long-term impacts. So that's what the U of M is going to be studying throughout the year. That resolution is due to the legislature February 1st, 2023. I think if transit is going to rebound, in the post-COVID world, it'll have rebounded by then, I would hope. And so we'll have a good sense of what the numbers are going to look like system-wide, which I think, putting this resolution forward, the Met Council should take a pause. And this is really a COVID pause. This is not a no-yes vote on Rush Line. This is let's pause for a year, wait for this study, get the results from the U of M. And the U of M is not, the U of M Center for Transportation Studies is going to want to show ridership. I'll just say that. I think if they have a bias, and I think they're professional researchers, but they're not gonna skimp. They're gonna try and make it work, and I think they'll do a fair job in their study. So let's pause, get those numbers, and then use those numbers. Those numbers and that logic, that data, should be what we use as we apply for the federal grant. And the federal grant, is going to have its own requirements. It has its own requirements for ridership along the line. And I'm just saying, let's pause, wait for COVID, get those numbers, use those numbers in the federal grant, and see how the project comes down. If the numbers are there, the project goes forward. If the numbers aren't there, then the project shouldn't go forward, and it really shouldn't. It's almost a $500 million expenditure. We ought to have the numbers and the right numbers before we do it. So that's what this resolution is. It's what's the word we use? Well, Met Council should pause activity on the Purple Line. So we're asking the Met Council, they're really the owners of this project now, to pause and wait for better numbers from COVID. So that is the resolution before you. Thank you.
It's open for debate. Mr. Bean.
I would like to propose, it's been proposed and seconded. I would like to propose an amendment to the resolution.
Okay.
I'm going to hand out some. This does not need to be read right away, but because what I'm going to be saying is going to be longer. There. All right. So I would like to begin by thanking Councilmember Walsh for the proposed resolution. Whether opposed or supportive of the Purple Line, I believe we all agree that updated data on all aspects of this project, but especially on ridership, is needed. As stated in the memo from City Manager Heinecker, the Metropolitan Council is already obligated under the rules of the Federal Transit Administration to again assess ridership prior to submitting final application for funding. I appreciate this acknowledgement of the Federal Transit Administration requirements. However, the proposed resolution does not go far enough because it only addresses ridership. In addition to ridership, the Metropolitan Council is also obligated to reassess cost effectiveness, environmental benefits, congestion relief, land use, and economic development. Eligibility for funding is based on the ranking received across all 6 categories. The work being done moving forward regarding the Purple Line is the evaluation of these 6 categories, which is being done with the assistance of a $1.25 million competitive grant received from the Federal Transit Administration. There is no mechanism in this grant to pause the reevaluation of those 6 factors. And the 5 factors I am proposing to be added to the resolution, in addition to ridership, as pointed out by City Manager Heinecker, need to all be reevaluated prior to submitting final application to the FTA for funding. Just as the City of White Bear Lake is doing due diligence on all aspects of the major investments in our public safety facility that we've been talking about, I think we can all agree that all aspects of the major investment in any BRT, bus rapid transit project, should be required to do the same. For our public safety facility, the city is contracting with professionals to work with our staff to plan for and implement a facility that will meet our needs into the future. Again, the Metropolitan Council is contracting with professionals to provide the required analysis with the help of the $1.25 million competitive grant. I see transportation planning and activity throughout the metropolitan area to be an ongoing process integrating all aspects of transportation infrastructure. Requesting the Metropolitan Council to pause activity for a project that impacts the entire East Metro and not just White Bear Lake is not achievable. Just as the Metropolitan Council has no jurisdiction to have the city pause our public safety facility planning, especially on only one aspect of the data we need, we should not, in actuality, cannot ask the Metropolitan Council to pause the reassessment that is mandatory to complete by the requirement of the $1.25 million competitive grant. With that said, I am supportive of requesting the Metropolitan Council include the findings of the legislatively mandated study by the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota related to the impact of the pandemic on public transportation in the required updated assessment of all 6 criteria when submitting to the Federal Transit Administration for its consideration. Again, I agree with and sincerely appreciate Councilmember Walsh's request to strongly reinforce the Metropolitan Council the need to rigorously evaluate the impacts of the pandemic on public transportation, in this case the Purple Line. My amendment is intended to expand and make stronger the need for updated data and analysis on ridership so that it includes the same level of evaluation on cost effectiveness, environmental benefits, congestion relief, land use, and economic development. Finally, my amendment is actionable and would keep the Metropolitan Council in compliance with the requirements of the Federal Transit Administration and provide our constituents with the much-needed updated, accurate data and analysis. The proposed action is consistent with my position regarding the Purple Line through my 12 years on the City Council. We have influenced many aspects of this project. Even though we don't have control over the Purple Line decisions, we must continue to exert influence. So at this time, I respectfully move that the "now therefore be it resolved" paragraph in the proposed resolution be amended to read as follows. Now therefore be it resolved by the City Council of the City of White Bear Lake that no sooner than February 1st, 2023, the Metropolitan Council incorporate into its submittal of the updated analysis on all required criteria to the Federal Transit Administration as part of the capital investment grant application process any available results of the legislatively mandated study by the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota related to the impact of the pandemic on public transportation, which is scheduled to be completed by February 1st, 2023.
So we have a motion to amend. Is there a second? Is there a second?
Well, I'm sort of inclined to second it for the sake of conversation. I think it's a courtesy. So, yeah, I'll second it.
Thank you, Member Walsh. The conversation now is germane only to the amendment. Conversation's open.
Well,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
I appreciate the other aspects to study besides ridership. I think that's wise. I'm just trying to figure out the amendment. The amendment, you could read the amendment to say, hey, Met Council, we're not really asking them to do anything that they aren't already going to do. I guess that's my problem with the amendment. I assume they're going to, you just mentioned it, they're studying all those things, including ridership. And you're saying, I guess you're saying include the Center of the Transportation Studies data in your already ongoing process. I feel like you've taken the teeth out of the amendment, or taken the teeth out of the resolution. I mean, I think the whole point is pause. I think the pause is a really important word. And if you take the word pause out, you're just telling the Met Council, go ahead and do what you guys are doing anyway. And by the way, wait for this, when you get this U of M study, incorporate that too. So you're really not telling the Met Council to do anything. I kind of disagree with you, Councilmember Beamer. I think we can tell the Met Council to do something. They don't have to listen to us. But I think it's perfectly appropriate for cities along the route to say, hey, we don't want it. We don't want it the way it is. We want you to wait. We want you to pause. We want you to wait for this data. I'm not ready to say we can't control it because the Met Council says that they're going to do it. They're going to do it anyway. I mean, you may be right in the end, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't voice our opinion as a city. And I think the city wants to pause. So I really don't like it when you take the word pause out and just say, study all these things, which you're probably going to do anyway.
Mr. Bean.
So, Councilmember Walsh, my understanding is that the only thing being done at this point is the study of that information. And if we tell them to pause, they cannot do that evaluation. Well, not if we tell them. If they were to agree to pause, they would stop doing the evaluation that they've already received the grant for, that the grant doesn't have any mechanism to pause. So I want to make sure that the results of the U of M study get incorporated into what the Met Council submits to the FTA for the final analysis on whether or not this is a viable project. So that's the purpose of my amendment here.
Yeah, but without the pause, the Met Council can do whatever they want. They can pause. They can pause for a year. It's going to delay the project for a year. They're going to have to tell the feds we're going to delay for a year, and the feds may take some of that grant money back, and they'll have to get back in line and apply again once they have better numbers. That's what I want to say to the Met Council today. Pause for a year, notwithstanding what it does to your federal grant that's ongoing. That happens all the time. Something comes up or you don't meet the requirements of a grant, they take the money back. They got grants going all over the place. The Met Council has tons of federal grants and different topics, including transit. If they want to, they can take a pause and they can deal with the federal grants. So I'm going to hold firm on that word pause, and I think that's what the city wants. That's what I'm trying to put forward on behalf of the city. So. Okay.
All right. So, well, disagree on that. With that being said, I do honestly believe that we have more influence than we have control, and the influence could be exerted with my amendment, where I do not believe, since we are one city out of the entire East Metro, I do not believe that we would be exerting any influence by using the word pause. But that being said, I mean, we don't need to go back and forth on this.
I agree with Mr. Walsh, and it was well said.
Okay. Member Walsh, so your preamble, I get where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. Your preamble was about support or non-support, but the resolution talks about pause, which is not about support or non-support. It theoretically is not connected at all. what does pause to you as you, I mean, you wrote it. I'm sure you put thought into it. I know you put thought into it.
Of course.
What does that mean to you?
It means we're listening to the people that we represent. That's what it means. I think we just had a pretty big, few months long discussion of this topic, and I think the message is stop. Probably the message is stop the whole project. This is a bit of a compromise. So the word pause, the message to the Met Council, the message from the City of White Bear Lake is it means we're listening to the people that we represent. That's what it means. It's got to be at least that strong.
Okay, I am actually not coming to the same conclusion. So I do not perceive it is the state does not give the City of White Bear Lake the authority to pause, to govern. This is not our project. None of the operating funding is going to come through us. We won't have staff. We won't do funding. It ain't our gig. The state legislature, in whatever wisdom, you've worked there, whatever wisdom they have put the determination of regional transit in a body that is not us. All right? And it seems to me that our responsibility is to hold them accountable, let them do their work. They're the ones that have the budgets. They're the ones that have the authorities, the guidance, the regulations, the state authorizations or non-authorizations, and that it's their job to do their work. I've tried to find some analogies to the limits of our authority. I've come up with a couple, but I'm not going to use them. I just don't think it's our authority to make these determinations.
Well, you're convincing me to withdraw the resolution and bring back a municipal consent vote, because it is in the statutes for cities along routes of transit, trains and buses, to do. Let me finish. It is an absolute practice of the Metropolitan Council to get municipal consent votes for both bus rapid transit and light rail. It is not required to get a municipal consent vote for bus rapid transit, but they do it, and they have done it for the lines that they've already built. So you're convincing me maybe we should just do a municipal consent vote. If you need the authority, if you need to see the normal practice of the Met Council, that's a municipal consent vote. I thought that was a little black and white for this group, and I thought the pause and the study and the COVID thing was a better approach. That's why you had that in front of you. And yeah, it's asking the Met Council to listen to White Bear Lake. They may not. They might not. Maybe other cities will also say something, and maybe they'll actually listen. But we can do the municipal consent vote instead. There's a mechanism for that. It's tried and true. I thought the pause was a compromise.
We have a motion to amend on the floor, so let's make sure we keep our conversation for now on the amendment, and then based on that, we'll either go back to the original motion or the motion is amended. Mr. Bean, is there any last words that you want to add with regard to your motion to amend?
Yes, just the fact that my motion to amend gives us a say in something we actually have influence over. And I do firmly believe that the end study that is done prior to the submittal of the funding request, which would be necessary for the funding request would need to be approved in order for this project to proceed. And to have, in addition to all 6 of the required criteria, the ridership, the cost effectiveness, and the environmental benefits, congestion relief, land use, and economic development. In addition to that, I want to make sure that the information that's available from the University of Minnesota study is also incorporated. That is a reasonable request. If all of this ends up that the project does not go forward because it doesn't meet the criteria, so be it. I'll be disappointed, but so be it. But the criteria needs to be examined, and they cannot put in for funding without all of the information, not just the ridership piece. They need all of that information. So I want to do something we have control over, and but it's important. We need to know that if it's a viable project or not. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Walsh and Mr. Engstrand, any last responses on your part? With that, I will call for a vote on the amendment, which is to substitute the now therefore be it resolved clause as distributed by Mr. Bean. Clerk, we'll have a roll call vote.
Councilmembers Bean,
Aye.
Jones, Engstrand,
Nay.
Walsh,
No.
Edberg.
Aye. The motion fails. So we are back to the main motion.
It's a great resolution. I urge your support.
Mr. Bean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have something I would like to say before we take this vote. I believe I know how the vote's going to go, but I do have something I would like to say. As many of you know, I've had a 28-year career as a peace officer with the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office. First as a deputy, then sergeant, then lieutenant, retiring as in the rank of commander. There are skills that I learned in those years, which I used to make decisions in my service on the city council, and for that matter, as a parent of 5 children, and in my life in general. I would often have groups of people who were in very emotional situations providing information that they believed to be true, often from someone else who told them. Inevitably, I would get different versions of the event from different people who were all convinced that they were right and the others were wrong. It is my job to get the real facts and make my decisions based on those facts. In the matter before us here today, there has been a great deal of conflicting information. I have made my decisions based on the facts and will always respect those who have differing opinions based on those facts. I agree with the late U.S. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who would say to his colleagues during the debate in the Senate chamber, you have the right to your own opinion, but not the right to your facts. Therefore, I think it's important that everyone understand the basis for my vote. First, I have heard the statement that the Rush Line has been misnamed because it will take approximately 45 minutes to get from here to downtown St. Paul. The facts are, the Rush Line was named because Rush City was the original terminus. Soon after being formed in 1998, the terminus was extended to Hinckley. In addition, Rush Line is an 80-mile corridor with the first portion from St. Paul to White Bear Lake being renamed through the Metro Transit as the Purple Line. It is not uncommon to spend 45 minutes in rush hour traffic, which does not rush either, to get to downtown St. Paul. But at least on a bus rapid transit, you can use that time spending 45 minutes to work, read, or catch up on personal business. Second, I have heard that the Rush Line is being rushed without public input. The facts are, the Rush Line Task Force was established in 1998. During the past 23 years, there have been many open houses, hearings, public information meetings, presentations, surveys, and other opportunities to get public input. The White Bear Press has carried the announcements and provided coverage over the last 2 decades regarding those discussions. Third, I have heard that residents' concerns were not taken seriously. The facts are, numerous changes have been made over the years to address the residents' preferences. For example, it was changed from a light rail to an electric battery-powered bus, or buses, so that it would be clean, quiet, less disruptive during construction, and more economical for projected ridership. Stations have been relocated and redesigned to preserve and enhance our beautiful downtown. Fourth, I've heard that the Bruce Ventral Trail will be destroyed. The facts are, For decades, the development of the Bruce Ventral Trail and the Rush Line Corridor have been tied together. They are both part of Bruce Ventral's legacy as a great environmental leader who is dedicated to reducing pollution and protecting our environment. For 20 years, there have been signs on the Bruce Ventral Trail noting that it is aligned with a future transit corridor. Under the leadership of our Met Council Representative Sue Ventral, the extension of the Bruce Ventral Trail into White Bear Lake is part of the Rush Line. Fifth, I've heard that the Rush Line will bring crime to White Bear Lake. As a required commander-level police officer, I have seen criminals do some stupid things, but it would be ironic to expect criminals to travel to White Bear Lake to commit a crime and to wait for an electric bus to escape, not even taking into consideration that the bus route is known and the bus will have video cameras observing the bus interior. My wife and I have raised 5 children in this neighborhood, and I take exception to those who accuse me of willingly endangering my family. Sixth, I've heard that the dedicated buses will be diesel-powered rather than electric. The facts are, the Metro Purple Line bus fleet will be electric battery-powered vehicles from day one when it is scheduled to begin operations in 2026 at the soonest. This fact has been affirmed many times. Seventh, I have heard that the impact of the pandemic on ridership has not been considered. The facts are, the Federal Transit Administration has detailed requirements regarding ridership, the environment, economic impact, congestion relief, and cost effectiveness. The Metropolitan Council's job is to continually reevaluate all transit projects to meet or exceed those requirements. They're doing their job. It is fully expected that the reevaluation will result in changes during the next phase of the project, just as they did during the phases leading up to the transition to the Metropolitan Council. Eighth, I have heard that the money for the project could be spent on other things in our community. The facts are, the money cannot be spent on other things in our community. The funding is dedicated to transit projects that meet all federal requirements. If not in our community, then it will be spent on transit projects in another community. Ninth, I have heard that there will not be enough ridership and that there will be too many people coming into our downtown. The facts are, I don't know the mathematical trick that simultaneously has too few and too many riders. Ridership projections are continually being studied, and the level of service will be designed to meet that demand. 10th, the proposed resolution calls for the Metropolitan Council to pause activity on the Purple Line until the legislatively mandated study is complete and such data is incorporated into the updated ridership forecasts. The fact are, this vote has no legal effect. The Metropolitan Council is legally required to use the $1.25 million grant to evaluate ridership, the environment, economic impact, congestion relief, and cost effectiveness prior to submitting for final approval. And the Metropolitan Council makes the decisions on the matter. White Bear Lake can and should influence the project to move it forward in a way that is best for our community, which is what I have always done during my 12 years on the City Council. Finally, rather than going on about misinformation, I will briefly describe what I call missed information. I have chosen just 2 historical references to what people thought would happen and the actual impact on our quaint downtown White Bear Lake charm. The first is from about 100 years ago. Paved streets were seen as the destruction of our quaint community and resort image. After all, those people from St. Paul would bring crime along with their roadsters, and we would lose our small town charm. I think we can all agree that paved streets were essential to moving into the 20th century. The second is from about 25 years ago, when the development of the buildings just north of the City Hall were under consideration. The biggest concerns at that time were that Cup and Cone would be destroyed and people would be killed trying to cross Highway 61. Again, I think we can all agree Cup and Cone is doing gangbusters and that people have learned to cross 61 when the stoplight says walk. A few weeks ago, I was called a traitor because of voting my conscience to ensure a Met Council transit project would help alleviate pedestrian crossing nightmare at the Whitaker and Highway 61. If the City Council were to have voted against improvements to this intersection, the Met Council has aggressive appeal opportunities, or it could move its proposed stop to an alternate location without improving the Whitaker intersection. I give the person yelling traitor the benefit of the doubt and propose that they were speaking out of emotion and not knowledge, but it is still my responsibility to vote my conscience based on the entirety of the facts. In closing, I believe the best thing I can do for my children and the future generations of our community is to cast a vote to show support for what I believe will retain our downtown charm and make White Bear Lake's future vibrant and bright. We don't want to be the only city in the metropolitan area of 25,000 people or more that does not have access to mass transit when the rest of the metropolitan area does.
Okay, folks. This is a meeting of the City Council held in public. It is not a meeting of the public. It is not a meeting with public input on this topic. I'm going to ask you, you're here to observe. That is entirely your right. It is entirely your right to agree, disagree, or do whatever you think is right in your minds. And I'm asking you to be polite observers and do whatever it is that you need to do outside of the council chambers, but inside of this council chambers, respect the deliberations of this council. So I'm asking you, please, civility and politeness. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Bean, for your comments. The floor is still open on the main motion, which is Mr. Walsh's original resolution to pause the, request that the Met Council pause. So I'm conflicted. I'm going to limit my conversation tonight to a motion to pause. I fully anticipate and respect, Mr. Walsh, that you may want to take up a different resolution. You can try tonight. That would require a majority vote to change our agenda or whatever, or at a future meeting. Again, that I won't be in this chair, and I completely respect your right to make that change. That's totally fine by me. I'm not going to support this resolution tonight. The primary reason for doing that is that this is not our gig. This is not our city's gig. The authority for taking this action lies in other bodies that are legislatively authorized to both entertain appropriations and all of the planning processes that go along with it. I'm going to let them do their job, and I would encourage you to take your concerns to the bodies making those decisions directly. So I'm not going to go further than that tonight. I anticipate that we'll have another conversation at a future meeting, and that's totally fine. But that's as far as I'm going to go tonight. I would say one other item. I do have expectations for the Met Council. I'd be open to resolutions that might speak to, we expect the Met Council to, if this project is funded, we expect them to manage it in a cost-effective manner, to adjust timing and the number of buses and take into account ridership. I would actually expect them to meet high standards for ridership estimates and the process by which, and to say that we expect them and the federal government that's entertaining that application to use sound and established processes for making that decision. I would go so far as to say I expect that the planning for this process as it pertains to electric buses is a mandatory component of this process. It's kind of an analogy that an electric bus, which I have ridden more than once, they're kind of like a Prius in a boxcar. All right? It's a very large vehicle, but they're silent. So that sense of not having the smell of diesel and not having the sound of diesel buses is a non-factor for me, and it's my expectation that will not change. If it did, I would be opposed to this process. So I would be amenable to a resolution at some point that identifies certain standards that we would expect the Met Council to uphold. Anyway. That can be a conversation for a future time. With that, I'm ready to move to a vote if the council is. All right, so the motion before us is the main motion, which is the resolution proposed by Member Walsh. Will the clerk call the roll?
Council members Engstrand,
Aye.
Walsh,
Aye.
Bean,
Nay.
Edberg.
No. Motion fails. Mr. Walsh,
When do we change the charter to let the deputy mayor vote, at these meetings? Doggone it. Is this the first vote? This is the vote, I bet, since we changed the charter to, in this situation, allow the person in the chair to actually vote. That is a very recent charter change. Who was on the charter
3 or 4
commission?
years ago. That I had
Sorry.
I had no instigation in that
I'm
process.
glad you were able to vote.
Yeah. So
Your residents needed representation in this debate, so it was a good change. I'm kidding. I mean, it's a good.
So I will. Is there additional action that you would like to put before? Okay. We'll move on. Thank you. We'll move to item 9B, which is a resolution accepting the Housing Task Force report. And Ms. Kane, I believe you are going to introduce our guests and our presentation.
Thank you, Chair Edberg and members of the City Council. With us this evening is Tracy Schmick, our Housing and Economic Development Coordinator, who has been the principal contact and shepherding both the consultant team as well as the Housing Task Force over the last 7 or 8 months in developing this report and recommendations for your consideration this evening. Tracy will be presenting along with members of the task force who were selected to serve in this capacity, and I'm really looking forward to the presentation this evening and feedback from the council this evening, as well as in future work sessions where we can really kind of dial in. So thank you for the opportunity.
Very good. Whoever is going to, Tracy, are you going to be leading the discussion? If you would come forward and take the mic.
Chair, members of council, I actually am getting off rather easy this evening, and Gretchen Nichols will be opening up the presentation, and we have 4 members of the Housing Task Force here to share an overview of the report with you this evening.
Greetings, Ms. Nichols.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and members and staff, for allowing us to present tonight the White Bear Lake Housing Task Force recommendations. My name is Gretchen Nichols. I am with the Local Initiatives Support Corporation, and I've been working with my counterpart, Barbara Ray, with the Center for Policy Planning and Performance to help support this task force over the last 8 months. I'd like to quickly introduce the task force members who are here to help present tonight, and we have some guests as well from the task force. Will you stand and introduce yourself, Andrea?
Yes, I'm Andrea West.
And Joe?
Joe Sure.
And Dale?
Dale Grambush, member of the Charter Commission.
There you are.
So wise.
And Bill?
Bill Grush.
And then we have some additional guests from the task force. Colleen?
Member of the task force.
Thank you. And Annette?
Annette Marrier.
So the objective of this effort was to provide a community-informed plan to help guide the council in creating housing policies and priorities that balance the tension between the addressing of evolving community housing needs and the desire to maintain the character and community that so many love. The White Bear residents and stakeholders have had a variety of ways to participate and provide input in this process. The task force was created to seek community-informed recommendations through a consensus-building process to address current and future housing needs for the city. There was extensive outreach effort to make sure that we had a task force that represented a diverse set of stakeholders from the community and reflected variations like age, profession and personal experience, race, time living in the city, housing tenure, etc. In addition to the task force, there were numerous outreach strategies that we used to engage community members throughout the process, both in person and virtually, such as a booth at the Market Fest, online community housing survey, and 2 community-wide housing forums. Communication was also at hand about the process and was shared through printed press, city newsletters, social media, direct outreach, and community partners. So to give you the gist of the recommendations, I'm going to hand it off to Andrea.
Welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Housing is critical infrastructure in a community. Safe, stable housing within a person's means allows them to contribute to community in positive ways. You can do that through gainful employment, attaining education, participating civically, volunteering, being a good neighbor, and living near your social support network. Without diverse and healthy housing stock, our local economy will be negatively impacted. Property values impact a community's wealth and ability to make investments in public infrastructure and services. And then there's workforce issues. We need people to fill roles critical to a community, such as teachers, first responders, and frontline workers. Also, people who work here should be able to live here. So what do people need in housing? Housing appropriate to their stage in life. Size, space, and level of maintenance required. Potentially first home or entry-level housing, housing accessible to people who have various physical abilities, smaller housing for smaller families, and maintenance-free or one-level housing so seniors can age in place. Housing that's within their financial means, regardless of income, is another thing that's needed. So it's not just people who are earning low incomes that are being challenged right now to find housing that's affordable to them, but also those who would like to transition to larger or smaller homes. Many middle and low income earners are having challenges finding appropriate housing in today's market, meaning that many community members are not able to secure housing that meets their current needs. And why should the city be involved? The topic of housing needs and opportunities is often seen as a private market issue, but the city has a critical role to play. The city has a traditional role in land use issues, including zoning and building regulations. The private market is not able to create a supply to meet current demand. Therefore, local governments need to play an increased role to ensure community members are able to secure needed housing. Next slide. For these reasons, the following 4 goals emerged as the most critical issues for the city to consider addressing. Create an affordable housing trust fund to provide needed resources to meet the community's housing goals. Address the growing need for affordable housing options. Support a range of housing options so that residents can transition between different life stages. And improve the development pre-application review processes so that the community and the council is better able to inform and guide future investments. Next slide. Joe next. Nope.
Nope.
Not quite. I have one more. There's a strong sense of pride in White Bear. You only have to look around to see all of the white bears in yards, on flags, and on the back of windows of cars. White Bear is a good community for many reasons. Physical character, strong civic network, good schools, and plenty of public amenities. While change is often met with concern, planning for the future can help guide development in a way that both meets future needs and fits into what makes White Bear Lake such a vibrant community. We believe the following 4 guiding principles will continue the gentle evolution of this community. 1, healthy communities. Safe, stable housing contributes to physical and mental health and positive employment and education outcomes, something we can all agree we want. Also, access to services and amenities that lead to healthy lifestyle, such as health, food, and physical activity. 2, prosperous or prosperity. This is different for everybody, but economic well-being of community and residents includes access to workforce for businesses and access to employment for community members. Housing that allows people to have financial resources beyond paying for rent and mortgage. 3, authenticity. This reflects the values, history, and culture of a place while contributing to a sense of belonging. And last, sociable or sociability. Design that encourages neighborly interactions, such as front porches that put eyes on streets and allow for more social interactions between community members.
Council, thank you. I'm Joe Sheeran. I'm going to present a little bit on some financing options and some recommendations for the future. And I want to reiterate what Andrea said a little bit. Investing in housing is really important. It's an investment in your community. And it's also important to think about housing as investing at all levels of your salary. Of course, Maplewood. My day job is City of Maplewood, so I apologize. Investing in housing in White Bear, we have our high-end housing, we have some decent medium housing, but we have made housing unaffordable for young working families trying to move into this community. We have also made it unaffordable in some cases for people at the lowest end of the income scale to live here. And why is that important? Because we cherish our downtown, we cherish our amenities, we cherish some of our conveniences here, and you want people to live near where they work. It ties them to the community in a very important way, and it gives them an opportunity to invest in this community, and it strengthens options that employers have in town if their people live in town and can get to work rapidly in this town. Some of the investing options, we talked a little bit about Housing Trust Fund. Housing Trust Fund, we could fund it a couple of different ways. One is through the HRA, if I'm correct. HRA is one of them. The other is through sale of city land when we sell it for a profit. And so when you sell land at market rate, it goes into a housing trust fund. It's important that we earmark that money. It doesn't go back into the general fund, because if we're serious about this investment, we need to invest in it wisely. We need to invest in it well, and we need to have some money in the bank to do it. So when people come to us for grants, when developers come to us, we have some skin in the game, and we have something we could offer them. The other thing is, again, when it comes to investment in housing, sale of city land at a reduced price is very, very valuable. It's expensive for these developers to come in and give below market rate housing unless they get some kind of city financing, a grant through the state, a grant through one of the regional agencies. So again, selling city land that we know is going to provide value for low income, affordability is really critical. And then the other thing in that is tax increment financing. I know it's not appropriate in every project, but I'll give you an example again from my day job in City of Maplewood. We're about to continue on a project, 148 units. More than half of the units are less than market rate, and that fits a critical need for your neighbor to the south. Moving on here, we also have some recommendations for the future. One, we have to establish goals. The committee has done a great job compiling some of the options out there, but it's up to council now to dig in and figure out what our housing goals are. We, as a committee, want to look at, obviously, affordable units. As Andrea said, life cycle housing. We want to, again, attract young families, and again, we want to be able to, people who work here and people at the lower end of the income scale, we want them to be able to afford in some way to live here. We want to invest a combination of new units, and again, attracting developers, finding parcels that are appropriate, selling city land at a discount if they're going to do affordable housing is important. We also want to keep what's working. We have a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing units. We want to keep them in good shape and we want to make sure they're available for the next generation that's coming through. And then supporting renters. I think a lot of the naturally occurring gets gobbled up by developers, and they put a lot of money in them, which is great because it's an investment in the community, but then it prices out the people that we want to keep in town. So one of the things we looked at as a task force is how do you incentivize an individual homeowner or a rental property manager to make an investment into their property so it's safe and suitable, but also it's not unaffordable for the people who are going to move in. They don't get priced out by the real estate flip. And then lastly, one of the things that we also want to establish here is, again, safe, suitable housing. And when we're looking at these projects, they need to be aesthetically pleasing for the people who live there, for the rest of the community. They need to have some green space. They need to have some eco-friendliness for two reasons. One, it's important for the environment, but two, just from a dollars and cents standpoint, if you could keep rental or heating costs low, you could keep energy costs low, the property manager is either able to pass that on to the renters, or the renters are then able to maybe pay a little more in rent if their actual day-to-day energy costs and environmental costs are low. So that's what I have for now. I think we have one more person. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Dale Grambush. Maybe just talk briefly about our guiding future developments, our recommendations. So we know that any change in community seems to be hard, just about in any community. And our recommendation is an effort to not only ensure development proposals are in line with our city housing goals and needs, but also enhance the public review process. Our update to the review process would introduce a pre-application review process for certain redevelopment infill proposals. Those developments that require a rezoning or requesting public financing would follow this new pre-application process. A pre-application conceptual site plan would be presented to the community development staff for some initial feedback and zoning analysis. Then, prior to a detailed plan, that preliminary concept is presented here at a city council meeting for some initial feedback and direction to the applicant and staff of the areas of concern that you may have. After that, it would go back to kind of our normal process, which could include the neighborhood meetings and notification prior to a formal application to communication to the citizens, and then for the citizens maybe to have their concerns back at the applicant. And then one additional step, we suggest that primary conception is then presented to a Housing and Redevelopment Authority Advisory Commission. This review would give some initial feedback and direction to the applicant and the staff whether the proposal is in line with the city's goals and comprehensive plan. That review then would come back to the City Council, where you would have an opportunity to give some additional direction to staff and the applicant on remaining issues of concerns before it would begin the formal application process. I think that's just my quick overview of that process. You can find a more detailed report on Appendix A on page 37 of the information. But I believe by starting this pre-application process, we find that projects would be introduced to the public earlier than we have in our current process. And it would also bring an additional level of community review with that new advisory commission. And again, it would allow the council to guide in the development process long before what our current plan is. Next slide, please. As the part of the information we were given, we looked at what I would call areas of opportunity or interest in the city. And it was the general feeling, if you can get general feeling over Zoom meetings, it was the general feeling of the task force that the city should place priority on sites that it already owns. And I think I'm ready to hand the next, of course, you'll hear over and over again, to make sure housing fits a full lifestyle, that we have housing available for large families, small families, and even single-person households. I believe Bill is next.
Thanks, Bill. I'm Bill Gerst. I'm the last of the crew here tonight. Lived in White Bear since the 1970s. Have owned 2 houses, both single family, both on the south side in Mr. Edberg's ward, actually. Raised 4 children, sent them all to White Bear Public Schools. They've all marched on to do good things. 3 of them live in the area, none of them in White Bear. They just can't find appropriate housing here. White Bear needs affordable housing, and the city should take an active role in finding those needs. Importantly, we need life cycle housing options here in White Bear, and that term has been mentioned here before, but everything from newcomers, young single people coming in, early families, midlife people, older folks, the whole deal. We've lived in our current house for over 30 years and are not ready to sell yet. But when we do, we would like to stay in the White Bear area somewhere. Currently, there's not a lot of options for us. And as more space becomes available in White Bear to build new things, we should consider all life phases and not get hung up on one particular style. Our friends and family live nearby, and we certainly hope to stay here. 2 grandkids in those new White Bear schools, too. So that's pretty cool. Finally, partnerships with local organizations and engagement with the community to build awareness. We've had trouble in White Bear with this community engagement part when a project comes online and a developer comes in to town and has a great idea and it deals with a particular neighborhood, and all of a sudden we're all caught up in a particular proposal. We need to talk about housing issues on a regular basis. And when tempers are cool and people can think about all these different housing options, and we don't seem to do enough of that. So the task force encourages more discussion about housing and housing choices in White Bear on a regular basis. And then finally, the near-term actions. Obviously, further discussion of all these recommendations by the council, probably some work sessions to implement the updated development pre-application process that Dale mentioned, and staff has spent a lot of time developing, updating the zoning code, and actively pursue projects that meet the city's needs. And so for that, we're thankful to have served on the task force, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. So we received the report in our packet. Now is a good opportunity to pose questions and pick the brains of folks who have spending a lot of time thinking and discussing the issues we face in our community. Who'd like to go first? Go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're a landlocked city, right? We don't have a lot of land to develop. So when you look at the Twin Cities, or even around the country for that matter, the housing issue, the housing problem is this, like you guys talked about, lack of affordable housing, lack of that $200,000 house, that $250,000 that a young family, a couple professionals, teacher and a cop kind of thing can actually afford to buy in a community where they might live. We don't really have the ability to do that. But one of the things driving it in other suburbs is zoning issues or regulations or covenants or things like that. Did you guys look at that at all? I mean, I imagine we don't. I don't think we have about a lot of that. But there's a big study or not a big study, a famous study kind of thing where a builder I think testified somewhere in the legislature or something that said they build houses in Hudson, Wisconsin, they build houses in Woodbury, Minnesota. The house in Woodbury costs $20,000 more. It's the same house, the same materials. It costs $20,000 more because of the regulations, the zoning, the cement choices that need to be made, the facade, the rules that Woodbury puts on that Hudson doesn't, and then you jack the price up. So I don't think we have that kind of thing. Would you guys look at that? I mean, because we're doing mostly redevelopment anyway, but.
Just as a process question, great question, by the way. Ms. Kane, should we direct our questions to you and you can farm them out to the experts? Or what process would you like us to use as we batter you with a number of questions on a bunch of topics.
Thank you, Chair and members of the council. I'd be welcome to trying to field those questions. I think I would not feel it would be appropriate to throw that at any of the task force members. I don't recall us getting specifically into zoning, but I will say that unlike many traditional suburbs, our zoning code allows for much smaller lots, minimum lot areas, minimal setbacks, just given a lot of our historical development patterns. And as the council has often cited, as you adopt new budgets and whatnot, that the city's development fees really are not nearly as, what I would say, generous as maybe other surrounding competitive municipalities where developers would look. So I'm familiar with the study of the Home Builders Association. White Bear Lakes is minimal compared to some of those growing. Yes. Yeah. So, we are looking, one of the recommendations of the task force was to update our zoning code to reflect not only the comprehensive plan that was recently adopted, but to really kind of examine the built environment. I would say that in our old White Bear neighborhood, where we've seen a lot of variances recently, especially on corner lots, we kind of overlaid a very suburban residential zoning district in an environment that's not really typical of suburban. It's more of a old town traditional development pattern. And so one of the other areas that we would like to study as the part of that zoning code update would be to examine what are the setbacks of existing lots, of existing homes, and so where can we reduce setbacks and allow not significantly larger footprints, but homes that fit that lot and fit within the established character and charm and built environment of that neighborhood.
Mr. Walsh, if I could follow on that. So, Ms. Kane, is the idea that we would be able to add housing capacity by adding I've got a separate question on auxiliary dwelling units, but by adding additional floors, additional bedrooms, whatever, is that the thrust of what you're talking about, or we'd increase the capacity of the home to serve more people? Or were you going somewhere else with that?
That's a great question, Chair. And I think my answer was getting more at being more accommodating for redevelopment of certain parcels.
Teardowns?
Perhaps. That's what the private market has brought. That's not really where the task force was focused. I think that's a private sector that's taking care of itself very well. And so that the task force was focused on areas that needed, I would say, examination of alternative housing, whether, for smaller households, different household compositions, just alternative living environments rather than perhaps the difference between a single-family home, a fee-simple townhome, or a multifamily hallway, four-story living environment. That there's something in that gradient of alternative housing that can be explored. And then I think the focus on opportunity sites that are owned by the city, recognize that time is on the city side, the opportunity to offer that more creative approach to a housing solution that fills a special niche within our community that isn't being satisfied by private sector, but is only the result of a private, public-private partnership with a developer.
Thank you. So I'm going to go Mr. Walsh and then Mr. Bean.
Yeah, so I have 3 comments, 3 left, 2 positive, 1 a little challenging. These are comments.
Comments or questions?
They're comments.
Okay, fine.
One, on page 27, one of the specific recommendations, design competition hosted by the city, invite designers to compete using city-owned or property sites to showcase ideas for smaller housing options that appeal to empty nesters. That jumped out at me. I love that idea, and I think I've been saying this, if I was on the Hugo City Council or a city with some land, I think this is where they should go. I mean, they ought to get creative and figure out a way to say, okay, we get it. You could build a $450,000 house there, sell it, and make good money. We get it, and that's what the market says. But is there a way way where you can make the same amount of money and yet be creative, and maybe it's the lot size and then a community park that goes with it. That kind of speaks to that, to the extent that we can pull that off in White Bear Lake with not much land. I just wanted to point that out. That jumped out at me when I read the report. The other thing I'm encouraged by is the idea of some kind of interim communication process. I think, Dale, you talked about it. It's like, I mean, we have a developer show up in Ann's office and talk about a proposal, and then we get 10 calls saying, why wasn't I informed of this development that's going up in my backyard? And we're like, holy cow, it's just an idea, but man, it's like we haven't, so that happens every time. So if there's a way, it's a communication thing more than anything, but if there's a way to somehow, like you say, we should talk about these more often, all the time. Councilmember Egbert had a great meeting once. We had a not a very good meeting about a development where people were really upset, and then the development went away, and Councilmember Edberg followed up with another meeting without the white hot property or the development, and we had a really good discussion that day. So I would encourage more of that. So we're going to comment on that maybe. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to make sure that we get to Mr. Bean as well. So go ahead.
No, just real quick. Again, my day job, City of Maplewood. We have a couple of parcels of land where we don't wait for the developer to come in and tell us what they want. We have meetings just like this, and we find parcels of land, like our North End study, for example. We found parcels that would be open for redevelopment. We've brought the community and we said, what do you guys want here? What's appropriate here? And so this way we could go to the developer and say, this is what our residents want, this is what our residents don't want, this is what's best for us. And then we're going to the developer with a ready-made package, as opposed to them having to fight through. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. So anyway, I just thought that was good thinking, and we had to keep working on that. My challenge is the solution, which I won't surprise anybody maybe, but one of the principles, one of the slide was prosperity. We want to encourage prosperity, but then one of the solutions is to literally take prosperity away from me and tax money and put it in a fund and then use it to buy other people's houses. I'm being unfair there a little bit, but that's my initial reaction to that. So what's the role of government? That's where we're stuck. I mean, the goals are good. We agree with the goals, but if the result is we're going to use tax dollars, and it's all tax dollars, whether it's HRA or whether it's selling land, well, that's land we could have put in the general fund, used for something else, to incent this kind of thing, that's a more difficult step. So I just wanted to put that out there, that the prosperity thing might be a little bit in conflict with me. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Bain.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments. One of the things I observed when I was out knocking on doors this last campaign is there are a lot more multi-family housing in neighborhoods that I would expect to be only single-family houses than I was aware of. And they seem like they fit in perfect, that there was no problem. And if I don't know if our zoning allows it on a regular basis, or if our zoning would have to be changed to allow something like that. But it's something that I took notice of, that the house A is, or residence A is right here, residence B is right there, and even residence C and D are right here, right next to each other, connected, and then a single-family house on each side of it. And it seems like that would be one way to make housing less expensive if that was more prevalent. Another comment, I do know, and again, this is just I won't be around to take action on this, but one of the things that I've appreciated about the city is how some of these land that we've acquired, we have acquired for redevelopment or development of, and if housing is great, but if there's a better development, a commercial development or whatever, that I think it's important that we keep that in mind, that just because the city owns it doesn't mean it should go to housing. Perhaps it's better off going to commercial. And especially since, one of the things that happened many years ago is cities cannot do eminent domain for economic development anymore. So we have to be careful how we acquire property for future development and how we go about doing that. And the last thing that I've noticed in my 12 years with the city is that our affordable housing is not concentrated in any location. It's been spread out amongst the community as a whole, which my understanding is it is beneficial for both the recipients of the affordable housing and their neighbors because of the influences that they have upon each other, and realizing that just because someone needs help doesn't mean that they're, bad people, or just because someone's doing well doesn't mean that they're bad. Or maybe they can give each other influences and insight throughout life. So I would encourage to keep that spread out and not have concentrated housing assistance. I still believe that we've done very well with it being spread out, and that's something that I learned to appreciate over the last 12 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I unfortunately have not been able to get my meat and potatoes into this report due to my house being upside down for the last month and a half. But I do want to say I would like the task force or city to look into Berkeley Road and get in some of our warehouse space down there. Maybe put some affordable apartments or housing down in that area. I also like to say, Mr. Gerst, if you could say hi to your son Steve. I graduated with him. I appreciate it if you'd tell him I said hi.
Go Bears.
That's it.
Thank you. So I have 5 buckets of questions. I do not expect answers.
I got to use the restroom.
Are you making an aspersion about the quality of my conversation?
I want to get back and ready to listen.
So, first, so I want to talk about who we seek to serve, who is not being well served. I completely get the need for a whole lifespan of needs. We have one of the highest percentages of senior citizens of any community, suburban or other community of our size. And I am modestly familiar with options for senior housing. Are we overbuilt in that regard? And at what point will natural evolution and revolution of the units that we have resolve that issue? Because at a certain point in time, baby boomers and the great generation, we're not going to need housing above ground. So, how do we balance this life cycle of need? So let me just stop there. Did you look at our inventory of what we have and whose needs are being best met, and how does that play out? And I'm going to start with the older generation. Where are we at on that? Ms. Kane, I'll throw it to you, and you can, if you don't know or need some time to research, I'm totally fine with that. But
Mr. Chair, I think I overheard Tracy wanting to respond to that without turning it over, baton, handoff.
Ms. Shimmick.
She's just a little bit more familiar with the Maxwell study that was completed at the onset of this.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, off the top of my head, I couldn't quote where we are at in senior housing production. I know, if I recall correctly, in the report, that was where we had a little bit more vacancy was in some of the more assisted living level. I would just, and members of the task force, please correct me if I'm wrong, but in their references to life cycle housing, it really came down to a conversation on when you're ready to move out of the house that you raised your children in, but you're not ready to move into assisted living. So their emphasis quite often was on the ability to find housing that met their needs as far as maybe being maintenance-free living or one level, but still independent and not and smaller, so that they saw that as a mechanism, a twofold mechanism. People get to stay in the community that they've lived in and invested in for a long part of their life, but also that they are freeing up their family housing, or more appropriate to families, for younger families to move into the community. So when they talk about life cycle housing, I don't think they were thinking building more multifamily type assisted living senior apartments, unless maybe it had an affordability component, but more along the lines of like senior one level living, not necessarily age restricted, something that met their needs and where they were at as older adults.
And rental or ownership?
What we heard from task force members was the preference was for ownership, and not necessarily. There's a lot of nuanced conversation happened about this, but not necessarily with homeowner associations. Although the finer details, I don't think is at the city level to dictate.
So there's clearly a value for retaining the life experience, the savings, the connections to community, of keeping senior citizens in the communities in which it's better for them to age in a community where they have a lifelong accumulation of relationships, of resources, all that kind of stuff. That actually has a major economic impact on a community. And so making sure that we have enough, especially given our relatively high proportion of senior-aged individuals, strikes me as being a smart place to look for, where are we situated? I won't ask a question now, but it does seem to me that conversation needs to be answered by looking out, that includes White Bear Lake, but also surrounding areas, given the relative unavailable, at least not wide open availability of buildable land within the city itself. Are we as a region meeting the needs so that folks can have that next living place accessible and modestly close to the region? Anyway, so that was one. It strikes me that our greatest economic advantage is our schools. That it's what attracts young families. Young families spend more. It's just the nature of children. And that's historically been our motif in this community. Bill, you referenced it in your comments. It's been my experience. And I think that certainly has been a theme that this council has dealt with in the last 12 years. That's part of the reason we invested in the YMCA and why we have looked at other various kinds of public amenities. Sports center, another one, absolutely, as a way of being attractive to young families. The affordability question, however, I'm looking for the answer of, it's fine to say we're going to reduce the value, the cost of city-owned land to a developer. What happens when that property turns over? How do we retain affordability over time? And it strikes me that this idea of subsidy followed by somehow we have to take that off the market. Land trusts or some other mechanism, limited equity finance, some tools that if we're going to invest public money, we're not putting public money back in 15 years later. I think that's a major failure of federal housing policy, is that every 15 years we're going out and bribing the owners again to try and retain it as affordable housing. It's just stupid. So I really want to see more thought given to the sustainability of affordability over time and more than 15 or 20 years. I'm talking like long range. So that would be an expectation to staff as you think about what policies we ought to be thinking about and talking about, because this idea of one-term market fixes, one-term subsidies, I'm sorry, that's just, it puts one finger in the dike until the next 5 leaks break out. So it's just, that's a non-starter for me. Did you have a conversation about house flipping, the role of companies like Zillow, the role of private equity that's buying up whole neighborhoods, flipping houses and driving up prices, and whether we have appropriate regulatory structures to address that? Was that a topic of conversation at all?
Mr. Chair, I would not say that it was lamented, but I don't think it was a substantive conversation on the role the city could play in addressing that issue.
Why not?
Could I?
Yeah, please.
We did have a city.
Would you mind?
Thank you. At our first housing forum, we did have the city of Edina who presented and talked about some of their strategies to address this. The city had created a program that people could contact them to sell their house rather than allow it to be sold to someone to tear it down and build it something else. So there are mechanisms that we could look out into the region to see how some other cities have done it. But the flipping issue has become quite prevalent in a lot of different communities to try to figure out how to solve for.
So what's going on there is folks who have more than enough are putting their money into equity funds. That's the American way. Fine. It's the market doing what the market does. But when those dollars then come and buy up whole neighborhoods, it's a willing transaction, except that it changes the ownership and the competitive nature of that next sale, and usually not in a way that favors a continuation of the kind of neighborhood, the kind of meeting of existing needs. And I consider it a form of market failure. There are equity investors who think it's the great American dream. Okay, I get it. But I think that's something we need to look at, because I believe we are just as vulnerable to that as communities like North Minneapolis. So, again, note to staff. I'd like to ask about conversation on rent versus ownership. Particularly, I've had two experiences in my ward. There was another one in the second ward, and particularly it's the market wants to give us rental. The communities don't necessarily want rental housing, at least multifamily rental. And particularly it's in these transition zones between single family and commercial, or it's the bridge, and how do we bridge that? Did you guys have conversation about that, and what do we do with that? So here's maybe the question is, if the market, represented by developers who are seeking to serve a return on investment, the American way, come to us and want to give us rental to meet a short-term need, how do we ensure that that balances our need for the full life cycle of housing that we want and the next generation, the what do we do 15 years from now? What was your conversation?
Mr. Chair, I guess I think the Housing Task Force didn't really delve into that. There were questions and concerns regarding the ability, rental housing does offer an opportunity for, certain segments of our population. So, by just outright, it wasn't something, that, the task force recognized that it provides, a desirable housing product. The concern that staff has run into when working with developers and always asking for an ownership model, it's not what the market is driving right now. There are legislative concerns with the legal liabilities of homeowners association ownership and conversion, kind of like legal ties to the developer of condominiums. So we have not seen those in the more attainable housing price points constructed in my 10 years here at the city due to state law, but have had conversations with developers of looking at ways to incentivize home ownership models, or kind of share in that risk that currently the private sector is not willing to step into at this price point, but recognizing that perhaps that's a role where the public sector could come in and partner to share in that risk so that home ownership models could be provided at a variety of price points rather than just starting at the very high end 450 up kind of price points that are discussed. So I don't think it was a focus of the task force as much as conversations that staff has had with developers trying to encourage or trying to explore ways to provide that home ownership opportunity, because you and I have had that conversation, and I do believe in that is really critical to building community and being open, accessible, and welcoming to price points across the spectrum. That's what makes White Bear Lake really unique, and we want to kind of continue to have housing opportunities at all of those price points.
Thank you. So I'm not necessarily recommending it at this point in time, but this community has a history, a successful history, of being its own developer. And the Pioneer Manor would be the example, originally created to fill a need for senior housing at that time, that city owned and managed. Well, we contract for management, but it's the property and it hasn't. I've given a fair amount of thought to thinking about where in our community, like maybe at a certain intersection down on the south side of town, where a more active role might be useful in controlling and meeting a specified need, trying to combine this in a way where the city ensures that it gets its need, not by waiting for a developer to come to us, but by us identifying what we think our community needs and wants, vetting it with the community, and pursuing that. There's a number of ways. I don't want to go down that much farther than that, other than to say we have historical precedent of doing that successfully. Last question. Let's talk about the new Housing Commission and how we manage tensions. So tell me how this proposed new Housing Commission differs from our Planning Commission, and what's the unique value that is created, or the unique mission that it would serve that's not being served by our existing Planning Commission?
I'm going to look and see if the task force members feel comfortable in answering that, Mr. Chair, but that was something that was developed really at the staff level. Given recent experiences with projects that oftentimes did not make it to this chamber for the policymakers who have been elected by our residents to serve the overall community. And so I don't want to call it a housing commission. It's very intentional in being the Housing and Redevelopment Authority Advisory Commission. And I don't want to get too far ahead of the task force or incoming elected officials, but we've had some internal discussions of bringing in some folks from existing advisory commissions, whether it's the Planning Commission, the Park Commission, Environmental Advisory, perhaps the Economic Development Corporation, as well as elected officials, and perhaps some at-large members that can help provide a citywide perspective on issues that oftentimes, when we've had neighborhood meetings, they become very localized in their perspective, understandably. And so not trying to replace the Planning Commission at all, but trying to help guide the developer and help guide staff on what might be acceptable before they engage in very expensive planning, engineering, architectural plans to submit a complete application for that land use application that then, after it's kind of vetted through a couple of these public hearing processes, then the developer might have the confidence to expend those funds to submit for the Planning Commission. As you may recall, we had that Navigating Our New Normal about 8 years ago, hosted by ULI, the Urban Land Institute. And one thing that will always stick with me from that conversation that we had over in the public safety training room was a developer wants to much rather hear a quick no than the long protracted maybe, with a lot of money expended. So if that's what comes out of that advisory process of the HRA Advisory Commission, with input from the council, that this just is not something that the community is interested in or the policymakers want to invest in or support that rezoning, that it just gives them some very early feedback before making a decision to invest in a formal application.
Thank you. So I want to riff on Councilmember Walsh's comment about developer conversation followed by 10 phone calls. I think when we, not if we, when we take up this conversation next, I would like us to consider at least two very specific considerations. The first is that we examine the noticing requirements that we currently have in our process. Seems to me that we are well geared to dealing with, hey, homeowner A is going to make an addition to their home and we're going to notice the folks that are within X hundred feet. Mm-hmm. But when we have a 5-acre proposal with multiple large townhomes and or multifamily, or we need a different standard and a different mechanism for communicating. And I don't think that the same noticing standard should apply to both of those situations. I think the second thing that I would ask for is that we as a city need to educate our citizens on how to either express support or non-support for these kinds of housing discussions. Right now, the developer has the conversation, somebody talks to somebody over Cobblestone or Keys or whatever, and all of a sudden we have, I think we need to actually educate on what is the process. When I think we actually should take control of the first meeting, that we identify standards that we expect a developer to meet and host. They will host or deliver the meeting according to specs that we have created so that we know that our citizens have access to information that they can then allow to have a reasonable conversation. I won't say it won't be contentious, but a reasonable conversation about how does this fit or not fit in our larger plans. That timelines are well known and laid out and articulated. It's on our website. We actually educate about here's how we deal with these things, and that it's open and transparent, and then folks can figure out how they want to fight with each other. And yes, we will be the referees, but it's like, let's figure out what the rules are and make that clear. Because I don't think that is at all well known now. It has actually been the source of great anger and confrontation. And Bill, I remember you and I being in one meeting. You remember which one that was? One city resident confused me with Member Jones. Actually, two of them. It was not pleasant. So, in any case, I just think those are two things we have to do. All right. Thank you for indulging me. So, I'll just say, in 19 years on the school board, 12 years now here, what I have learned that has been most striking to me in the last 12 years is the role that the nature of our housing stock plays in the development of our community. I was just kind of oblivious to that. Houses were houses, they were bought and sold. Now, there is a magic inside of how do communities develop, what are the rules and the roles that are played in shaping, and how does the variety and nature of housing stock shape the community that results. And I think that's something that we need to pay a lot more attention to. Thank you for indulging me. Does any other council members have other thoughts, questions, comments? Anything else from staff or the commission? Yes. Please come to the mic. But absolutely.
Colleen Ketchum, a member of the task force. Affordable housing does not mean Section 8 housing. That is one form of affordable housing. It's the whole package. It's from the seniors, and one of the reasons what you had asked about the senior housing is very expensive. And if there's vacancies, that's why. So you need something that people can transition down to. They're, contrary to what people believe, when you're retired, your average Social Security is $1,500. That's nationwide, I think. You can't afford a $3,000 payment for assisted living on $1,500 unless you're on welfare or waiver programs, and that's that's a form of affordable housing as well. But it's the whole spectrum. It's a young couple that gets married. They really don't want to live in an apartment. They just want a nice small house to live in, and there's nothing available. So keep that in mind. It's not just Section 8 housing, and I think we need to educate the community when we say we want some multiple housing, we want it to be affordable. All of a sudden they're saying, oh, Section 8, we don't want those people in my backyard. Well, those people are our grandkids. Those people are our grandparents, and we need to keep that in mind. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Others? All right. Yes, please.
To give you a perspective. The big reason that I joined or applied or whatever to join is I'm single with 2 cats. I own a 3,000 square foot finished home, 3 bathrooms, 4 bedrooms, big oversized garage, 3 blocks from downtown. I don't want that big of a house tomorrow. I'm within walking distance of every school. But I'm not moving unless I can find something smaller of my own. I still want to do my own thing or whatever kind of thing. I don't want to be an apartment or anything like that. But unless I'm within that walking and biking distance. And really, quite frankly, there's not a whole heck of a lot.
So there's one housing need, an accessory dwelling unit, which we do have authority for, but that's not what you're looking for. It's a whole different, it's a class of housing structure all unto its own.
Next to each other kind of thing, but it's still separate and feels like my own space kind of thing, or whatever. Because what I'm noticing a lot in the downtown area, close to downtown, is the affordable smaller homes being tore down, bought up, tore down, and a big old mansions being put there. So anyway, so that's my story.
Big patio homes.
Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Chair, we have a resolution in front of us. So I'll move approval of the resolution accepting the report, accepting the Housing Task Force recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bean. Discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. On behalf of the city, thanks to you and to all of your task force colleagues. We greatly appreciate your commitment to our city and your engagement. Thank you. Let's move on to our next item, item 9C. City Manager, would you like to talk to us about a contract with Crouse Anderson for construction management services?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the council. So at your meeting on October 12th, the council approved a contract with Wold Architects for the completion of the construction documents for the public safety building. And also at that time, you authorized staff to seek proposals for construction management services, which they did. And they had since received applications and did some interviewing and have selected Crouse Anderson as the preferred construction manager advisor. In that role, Crouse Anderson, I'm going to use KA as we did in the memo because it's a lot to put forward. So KA would act as the city's advocate on the construction site, manage the contractors, the daily construction activity, and review the budget, as the project would go along. We used KA also when we did the sports center, the council may recall, and actually it was a few of its members that were on that team would also be on the same team for the public safety building. I can say that we worked very well with that team. Any work that we had done after related to the commissioning was not a function of Crouse Anderson. That was a function of us as a city choosing not to move forward with a commissioning agent or doing that next step, which we are recommending the council move forward with, and we are now, our next step after the council approves this resolution, if you are so inclined, would be then to seek proposals for a third-party commissioning agent then to work alongside KA to make sure that all that is being implemented and put in place is going to function appropriately and energy effective so that we don't have to go back and redo some things. So with that, there is a recommendation in front of you. I should have added that the services that were proposed initially would be at $22,000, as was in their proposal. Any costs thereafter would be very directly related to the costs of the project, and those costs are incorporated already in the estimates that were provided by Wold. And the estimates for KA as part of that project would be about $800,000. So that does not increase the estimates that were brought to council at the meeting in October. It's part of the costs that have already been estimated. So the resolution in front of you then would authorize the city manager, myself, to enter into contract on behalf of the city with Crouse Anderson for construction management advisor services for the public safety building project.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second. Good. Questions, discussion?
If she signs the contract, then she has to stick around to execute it then, right? I'm sorry, we already
years, I think.
No, never mind, sorry.
It's just a name with the title underneath it.
All right, fine. So we have a motion and a second discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Let's move on to the next one, 9D.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the council. So actually, you'll see on the agenda, it says D and E. So both resolutions are part of this report that I'm going to give you, and it's related to financing for the energy improvement project that was approved by council also at the October 12th meeting. As council will recall, we talked about putting forward bonds for, it's approximately half, just a bit over half of that project that's not otherwise accounted for in some other budgeting mechanisms that were put forward, and we were going to do that next year as it relates, and do it at the same bond issuance, which is still an option. But in going back and reviewing this, not just internally, but we also worked with Ellers, and through their advice also, we were looking at the different cost estimates related to issuance. And we would instead advise that at least for now, we're proposing that we finance the remaining, it's approximately $850,000, the remaining costs of this project internally by using both the Economic Development Fund and our non-bonded funds for a 15-year period, and we would charge ourselves interest for that at a rate of 1.5%. And again, as it was outlined at our last meeting, again, I just want to reinforce that any debt we pay, whether it's to the bonds, or for any debt service that's associated with bonds, or any internal loan, is being paid for by the energy savings that we are guaranteed through this project. And any payment toward that, which had already been determined, is just a little over half of the entire savings. So we're still going to be receiving, and again, this is part of the conversation that we had on October 12th, but just I want to emphasize as we talk about whether we do bond issuance or we move towards an internal loan, we are using just a portion of the energy savings that we're receiving through the entirety of this project. And I would further add that this is what we're advising at this time, but I think there's an opportunity for council to look at this as they look at the long-range financial planning document in its entirety, as you do every year. And next spring, when you do that again, you can decide whether or not you think it's appropriate to maintain that internal loan, or in fact, would you rather just bond for it so some of those funds are more liquid. We certainly have the capacity in both of those funds to support an internal loan, but I do think that it would be appropriate for there to be more conversation. And so with that, there would be a second resolution that we're asking council to consider, which is like that reimbursement resolution council has done in the past whenever we've done street projects prior to us needing to bond for them. We would do them in the event we decided we wanted to bond later. So this would provide us the opportunity to, if you considered that second resolution, to go ahead and bond at a later date, actually over a 3-year period still. You'd have that flexibility within 3 years to decide to bond and pay back that internal loan, and instead use a portion of those savings to pay back that debt service. So there are actually two resolutions before you. The first resolution, which was 9D on the agenda, would be to authorize the establishment of an internal loan from both the Economic Development and non-bonded funds to finance $855,000 of the Energy and Performance Project at a 1.5% interest rate over 15 years. And then before I get to that second resolution, just for those who are listening, Council saw it in its packet, but we do lay out how those payments would be taken and paid to both of those funds respectively, and also are able to demonstrate once again that it's coming directly from the energy savings. So there's no impact on our tax levy to make these payments. It's all coming from the project that we've undertaken. So then the second resolution would then to consider adoption of a reimbursement resolution, which would provide us an option to bond for these expenses incurred by the energy improvements if it was so decided by the council within 3 years of its adoption. So in summary, we're recommending that you adopt the first resolution to allow for that mechanism of this internal loan, and we would get that set up. And then after further evaluation, you would decide next year that you would either continue that loan as was set up, or you would go ahead and bond for it, and you would have that authority under your second resolution. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Going to be stupid. So the reason we would want to consider that is because we're paying ourselves for expenses of issuance that we would otherwise be paying the market, whoever our bonding entity is. This is it's a secure transaction because we have the projects are guaranteed to generate net income, and we have the current capacity within our funds. So it saves us some money. We don't have to go out into the bonding market. We don't have to put it on city taxes.
Correct.
All right. Other questions, or is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second. It's moved and seconded. Questions? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That takes care of 9E. I'm sorry. So was that... Mr. Bean, was it your intent to move 9D?
It was my intent to move 9D.
All right. So you have the authority to set up the internal loan. Is there a motion related to 9E?
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you are still
I am, and I'm just looking for here it is, my memo. Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the council. So before you is a proposed amendment with LELS, which is our police sergeants, for the police sergeant's contract. This is the last of those that we bargain with, and not anything really new to report based on what we've done with the other contracts. Again, it would be for a wage increase of 3% in January, on January 1st, with a 1% increase mid-year, as we have done for the other bargaining units. And then we are proposing to eliminate a start step, and this, again, is just a housekeeping item, so there's not a whole lot to report on that. Importantly, of course, would be the insurance coverage, and what's being proposed is same and similar to that which was proposed for the other bargaining units, with the city paying 75% of the increase that we are experiencing, and employees paying 25% of that increase. And lastly, you'll note that we are proposing adding Martin Luther King Jr. Day to its list of paid holidays. That was the last bargaining unit that hadn't had that yet in its contract, and so we'd like to have that recognized officially. And then if, in fact, Juneteenth would also be added as a paid holiday, and that would be following the state's adoption as a state holiday. So with that, I would recommend approval of the attached resolution amending the LELS police sergeant's contract.
Very good.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Bean. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Engstrand. Discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We get to the consent agenda. I'm just really glad that we have public facilities with height to them alongside major freeways that allow us to, yeah, you got it. Cha-ching, check, never. Yes, so is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Mr. Engstrand. Discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. There is nothing to be discussed. So do we have some additional communication from the city manager?
Mayor and council, or not mayor, chair, Mr. Chair and council.
I'm
the whole meeting I was trying to keep
Mayor
that
Emerson
right.
will have my scalp.
I know.
And there's not much there to have.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, just a reminder for those who might be listening. I know it's on your calendars, but our next meeting is our Truth and Taxation hearing. It's an opportunity for members of our public to come to the meeting and express any concern they might have over primarily our budget, or if there's questions they have about the taxing process. Certainly we would be happy to try to walk them through that process, and then there'll be consideration to the budget that was proposed for 2022 at that meeting. So it's an important meeting. Also, just wanted to I guess we're going through lots of transition, and we've had opportunities to meet with the the hired person, city manager, the person that's been hired to take my place when I'm done on the 17th. And so she's becoming acclimated to some of the ways that things are run here and meeting staff. She'll be coming in one more time to kind of meet with the entire staff and spend a day here kind of getting familiar before she starts on the 20th. So everybody's excited for that, and I think we're expecting a very smooth transition. So I wanted just to let council know that things are happening behind the scenes with regard to that. And then lastly, there will be a brief report from the Welcoming and Inclusive Community Task Force that was tasked by the mayor at the beginning of the year. As council will recall, it will not be a full report of their findings. That will be coming in 2022, beginning of. But in deference to the work that she did on behalf of this task force in calling it forward, we want to make sure that there's an update at her last meeting. So that will be also on the next agenda.
Very good.
I don't know if Ms. Kane has anything she would like to add.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, just a quick update that next Monday, the 29th of November, is our last Planning Commission meeting of the year. We have a very large agenda since we won't be meeting in December. So those items will all hopefully be on your consent agenda for the December 14th, but also a reminder we will be having the second reading of the billboard amendment, as well as specific proposal for a dynamic display billboard at the Pillars of White Bear Lake site, as well as a few other land use applications that are pending. So, and then I know that we've got the public safety building coming in for formal application for its conditional use permit, because that type of capital investment in a public zoning district does require Planning Commission review and recommendation for the council. We will have that on your agenda for your February meeting.
Okay, very good. Anything else? So anything else for the good of the order? Seeing none, I would simply like to extend to all of you a happy holiday. Part of my other Thanksgiving is for the good work and good spirit that exists among us and the work that we've done this past year. Thank you. It's we do not always agree. We do not always share exactly the same vision, but we do some good things with each other, and we do it with civility, and I give thanks for that. So with that, happy Thanksgiving to staff. 3 of you. Would you please?
Yeah, we will.
Thanks.
I will. Yeah.
Thanks to all for your fine work throughout the year, and hope you have fine holidays as well. With that, I would accept the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Meeting